Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Sprues. In this inbox review, we'll be taking a close look at the Hasegawa 1/72nd scale Mitsubishi A6M2B Type 21. This particular kit was a gift to me from one of my patrons and fellow model makers, Archie Palmer, so thank you very much for this one. And it has its origins back in the 1990s, but has since been reissued many times. So without further ado, let's have a closer look at this kit and see how it compares to the offerings from Airfix and Tamiya. So having a look at the box art, we have this lovely picture of two Zeros flying over the ocean with a little bit of land just coming into view through the clouds. So a very nice little piece of box art there. We've then got the usual Hasegawa titles on the corner here with the Mitsubishi A6M2B Zero Fighter Zeke Type 21 being the titles. And as for the rest of the box, there's a few little notes about parts being included, but no paint and glue, along with instructions in various languages, repeats of the box art on the side, and on the top we have a nice picture of a finished model to give you a bit of an idea on what the kind of quality is with this kit. There is also some dimensions and the part count, as well as barcodes and the kit number of D21. There are a few other little things here and there, but unfortunately I can't read Japanese, so I don't really know what it says. And there's nothing on the back of the box, so we might as well open this one up. It's a top opener, as is typical for Hasegawa kits like this one. And as you can see, we have quite a few different sprues in this plastic bag, along with our clear parts in their own bag inside of that, which I like. And at the very bottom, we've got our instructions and the decals. There's also an extra little bit of paper with some basic sort of modeling advice if you're starting out, and even a link to some YouTube videos, so some very nice references here if you're just beginning and need a little bit of advice and help with going about making your first model. Having a closer look at the instructions, on the front of them here we have a picture again of a finished model to give you a bit of inspiration and something to aim for, as well as a very nice bit of history about the Type 21 in particular, along with its dimensions. And then opening up, we have the assembly guide. It's all on one page, which I find a little bit annoying because you have to spread it out, and if you have a bit of a crowded modeling desk, it can be hard to then see. And unfortunately, they're sort of going over the folds, so it's going to be a little bit harder to sort of make the instructions smaller, if that makes any sense. The painting guide takes up the entire bottom of the page here, and as you can see, the first number we've got here is for GSI Aquarius hobby colors, while the other number here that's sort of shaded out is for Mr. Color colors. And then we just have a name for the colors repeated in various languages. So a little bit messy, and if you're not using hobby colors, Mr. Hobby colors, you'll want to convert them. And it also mentions what the sort of mixing ratio key here means, but it doesn't look like there are any colors that you actually have to mix. As for assembly itself, it's reasonably well laid out with different shades indicated for the various colors when there are different colors you're painting on a single piece, as you can see on the joystick here. But assembly, pretty simple. You start with the cockpit, which consists of a seat, a rear bulkhead, a joystick, and the cockpit floor. Looks like there's a decal included for some side details here. Then we've got the engine assembly, which consists of two engine halves plus a gearbox, followed by the propeller assembly here. Looks like we've got different colors depending on which scheme you're going with, and I can't see any sort of washer mechanism to hold the propeller in place, so perhaps you have to glue the propeller in a fixed position. Then we've got the engine cowling, which consists of two exhausts and a little intake being added to the cowling itself. And once you've done that, you can then add the cockpit to the inside of the fuselage halves, followed by this little part which I think contains the machine guns, and the instrument panel gets attached to it as well, and then that gets added to the front of the fuselage. Again, there's a decal here for some instrument panel details. And once that's done, you've then got your wings, which consists of a single lower half and two upper halves. And it looks like you've got the option to drill out holes here for a drop tank in the center of the wings there. Then for step 7, we're adding the horizontal stabilizers, followed by the engine and then the cowling to the fuselage. And once that's done, you can add the wing to the underside of the fuselage. And it looks like we're adding the little control balances or the hinges for the ailerons there. Step 9 consists of our landing gear, which is the main strut, followed by the wheel and then the outer part of the landing gear bay door. The marking guide indicates the decal and color placement already, depending on the markings, which I find a little bit annoying. It's probably better if it was shown in the marking guide rather than here. But they've done something similar for the propellers as well, so yeah, just have to be careful when painting the aircraft and adding decals that you refer to this as well as the marking guides on the back. Then for step 10, we assemble the drop tank if you're going to have it installed. And for step 11, we then add the last of these smaller accessories, such as the control balances on the underside of the ailerons, which I don't think I've seen in the other Zero kits. Then we've got a pitot tube on the outer part of the right wing, the various small landing gear bay doors, and then the main wheels themselves, which look like they're going to be a little bit tricky to install, given the small amount of contact there. The fuel tank if you're installing it, and we've got a tail hook by the looks of things. Then lastly, for step 12, we add the various antennas along with the canopy, and the propeller can get slotted on. It looks like there is a little cylinder for it to sort of fit to the gearbox too, but nothing to lock it into place. So I'd probably recommend gluing it or adding a spare polycap to the inside of the gearbox part here if you've got some. On the other side, we then have our markings and also the sprue map, which I probably should have pointed out earlier, but it's a sprue map. It indicates the parts, and there's a few that we aren't going to be using, which makes sense because Hasegawa have reused this tooling for various different variants. But for the markings, we've got 3 schemes included, which is nice. A lot more than the Airfix one and a similar amount to the Tamiya kit. The first one here is from the aircraft carrier Akagi, and it's part of the 2nd Squadron 1st Section, number 1. And it was flown by Lieutenant Commander Siguri Ataya, and I apologize if I've mispronounced that one. But it's, done in the standard sort of greyish colour with the black cowling, I believe a silver spinner, and then a stripe, which is clearly a decal. And then it's got the number A1155, so I think that's an aircraft that's been done a fair few times. The second aircraft is the one I'm most interested in doing, and it is from the Tainan flying group, flown by Saburo Sakai, who is probably one of the most famous Japanese pilots who luckily survived the war and has talked a fair bit about his experiences. And he was, as it mentions, part of the Tainan flying group who was involved in the Battle of Milne Bay. Although Sakai himself, I don't believe, ever flew over Milne Bay. I know he was involved in the Guadalcanal missions, which started just at the same time. And I do believe they kept some of their A6M2Bs because the A6M3s they were transitioning to in August of 42 were limited by range. So I have heard some sources say they kept a few of the 2Bs around. So there's a good chance that's the aircraft I'll do. I think he has been known to fly other aircraft, but this particular one is V-107 with some nice blue stripes that are included as decals, but otherwise it's just in the standard grey with black nose and silver spinner. The third and final aircraft is a bit of a different one here with the various shades of very messily applied green, and it is from the 261st Flying Group. So it's nice that you've got a wide range of markings, and it's pretty cool that you've got both the early grey and also the iconic roughly applied green camo schemes to go with. So a nice choice from Hasegawa in terms of schemes. Opening up the bag here, which contains our sprues, we have quite a few. So first up, we'll have a look at this rather small one here, which contains our fuselage halves. As you can see, we've got recessed panel lines, very similar to the Airfix kit, although they are very shallow and quite crisp, which I personally think is quite nice, so they won't be too exaggerated. But they have made them a little bit wider for the vents towards the rear of the engine area, which is nice. Few little details such as access hatches are moulded, no rivet details, but they have done some raised lines here for the fabric control surfaces. There's no detail by the looks of things inside of the cockpit area, but there are some parts here to help line up the cockpit floor piece. The tail wheel comes moulded to the fuselage, so if you wanted to have it retracted, you're going to have to do a bit of surgery, which is a bit unfortunate, but otherwise it looks pretty nice. One interesting thing to note is that as well as the sprue number, they also appear to have the variant of 0 moulded to the sprue frame, which is probably quite handy for them given that they've recycled the tooling a fair bit. But it's also kind of useful because I suppose if you've got a fair few spare parts, you'll be able to easily tell what model of 0 you could use them for if you need them for another kit, or you want to, I suppose, put together a Franken 0 out of spare parts. We've then got part of our machine guns here and the cowling with, again, some nice recessed details. There does appear to be a tiny bit of flash on the edges of this part in particular and a few little scuff marks, but nothing too major. And then we've got our radiator intake, I believe, with a fair bit of flash there that's going to need a bit of cleanup, but otherwise not too bad. Moving on to the next set of sprues, we have the wings here, which again, recessed details, which are pretty nice, with a few raised marks for the fabric ailerons there. A few of the access hatches are done on the underside, and they have drilled out, or at least recessed in the ejection port for the cannons there and the wings. A little bit of detail is moulded inside of the wheel well there, such as these little actuators for the inner part of the landing gear bay doors and a bit of ribbing work. Although they are very shallow wheel wells, so they probably look a little bit more basic than your other kits that we've looked at. On the upper surface of the wings, again, some very nice recessed details there that are nice and shallow and pretty cleanly done, with a few little raised bumps here and there, and also some parts here to help line up the horns, I think, for the ailerons. There is a bit of flash on the intake part here, which I think lines up with the engine, and it looks like there's some scratch marks or some sort of imperfection just on the underside here, which might need to be sanded a little, but otherwise not looking too bad. The largest of the sprues we have is Sprue C here, which appears to be common 0 parts because it doesn't mention a particular model. But as you can see, it's got most of our finer details, like our little control linkages and balancing horns in the corner here. We've got our seat just here, along with our instrument panel, and they're pretty basic with a little bit of flash on them, but there are decals included for the instrument panel detailing. The seat doesn't have anything other than a few ejection pin marks on the other side there, so it's sort of just the basic shape. We've then got our control column there, which doesn't look too bad. The rear bulkhead for the fuselage in the cockpit, which doesn't have any detail on it, and it does have some ejector pin marks, but if you put them facing backwards, you won't notice. The cockpit floor here has some rudder pedals molded to them, which don't look too bad, but the rest is quite basic. There is a little raised sidewall area here, but there's no molded controls to it, but I do believe, again, we've got some decals for some detailing. We've got the main landing gear struts here, which look a little bit more basic than the other kits I've looked at, and a little bit thicker, so at least they're nice and strong. But in general, yeah, detailing on them is reasonably simple. We've got, I believe, our pitot tube and the main antenna, our tail hook, and 20mm machine gun cannons, I believe, so they don't look too bad. We've got 2 different propellers, or sets of propellers here. One thing I didn't mention when looking at the instructions is you have to add the individual propeller blades to the propeller's base piece here, which is a bit annoying, and they're going to be a bit trickier to line up, but oh well. Obviously, it's a compromise since they've recycled this tooling for other variants of the Zero. We've got our horizontal stabilizers here with a rather large piece of flash stuck to the right side one here, but fortunately that shouldn't be too hard to clean up. Our drop tanks are just above it, and they don't have much surface detail except for like a recessed panel line just at the back there, so pretty basic. To the left of them, we've got the exhaust pieces and then 2 other little squares that I'm not too sure what they are. They have slightly drilled out the exhausts, which will be nice. That'll add a little bit of depth to them. Otherwise, though, they're reasonably basic. We've got what looks like 2 different options for gearbox parts, but I'm assuming we're only going to use one of them. Just below that, we've got one of the antennas, which I believe was mainly used by Zeros operating on carriers, but often removed from the land-based ones. We've got the base piece of the propeller there with the joints to add the blades into, and then a little pin at the back so they can slot into the gearbox. Again, there's no pinion or sort of locking part to lock that into place, so you might want to put a polycap in there if you can find a spare one that'll fit. We've got the engines just to the left here, along with our main wheels. The wheels themselves have a little bit of detail for the hub, sort of raised there, but otherwise they're pretty basic, and there are some quite large ejection pin marks on the back here, which you might want to clean up. The engine cylinders have a little bit of recessed detailing on them and some lines at the top there, but otherwise they're pretty simple, and to me they look perhaps a tiny bit underscaled. We've got 2 different spinners here, one that's slightly sharper and longer, so I'm not exactly sure which variant we'll be using, but obviously, again, another carryover from this tooling being recycled. And then finally, we've got our main landing gear doors with the larger ones here. That's what these parts would be, they'd be the smaller ones. But here's the inner side ones, and then the main ones here. They have done some recessed detailing on the outside there. On the inside, there's some raised parts to line up the main struts. And they've also done a little bit of detail inside the main wheels here, although there's a few ejection pin marks that are going to need to be removed. The last non-transparent sprue we have here contains the engine cowling, but it appears to have come loose. It looks a lot better than the Airfix one in that there's no distortions, although there is a bit more flash on the inside there. So that's going to need a bit of cleanup, but otherwise not looking too bad there, with some very nice recessed access hatches in the cow flaps there, and the nice little divots here for the machine guns. The underside part here has a little gap there, which will end up getting filled by the oil intake, which is a separate part. The clear parts are contained inside their own bag, which I'm a big fan of as it protects them from getting scratched by the other parts. There's only one part on the clear sprues here, and that's of course our canopy, so there's no option to have it open or closed, which is a bit of a shame, but given the basic cockpit, probably for the best in this kit. There is a little bit of flash on the edges here, but otherwise there's not really any scratches or any damage, which is good. The quality on it is okay. It's a little bit thick, and as you can see, there's a lot of curves on the Zero's canopy, so my finger is very heavily distorted. I'm not a big fan of Hasegawa canopies, so there's a good chance I'll replace this one because the framework tends to just be raised panel lines rather than raised surfaces above the windows, which I find very hard to paint and mask up. And finally, we come to our decals, which seem to be of pretty good quality. You can see we've got our couple of common stencils there with the walkway markings being just the outline sort of done rather than having any clear film in the middle, which means they'll be a bit tricky to install, but there won't be as much risk of silvering, which is a positive. The quality of the instrument panel dials is actually really quite good. You can make out a lot of the markings on them, and I like how they've done the serials as well. They're of really good quality. So yeah, very colourful set of decals as well, with all of the various fuselage markings, depending on which aircraft you're going with. And generally, I find I don't have any issues with Hasegawa's decals, apart from the fact that in older kits they seem to yellow really rapidly and quite badly, but obviously this one has not, which is good. So that wraps up my look at the Hasegawa A6M2B. So it's a pretty simple kit with a lot of detail, especially in the cockpit being very simplified, although you do get 3 markings, and they tend to be quite common and go for reasonable prices. The most expensive ones I've seen go for around about 25 AUD, which is a bit much. However, it's more common to see them for 20 AUD, and of course, being an older kit and quite a common one, they're pretty ubiquitous on the second-hand market as well, so if you're after a cheap Zero, this is definitely a good option. Definitely also a good one for beginners, as it's quite simple, and there's not too many fiddly things apart from maybe the propellers to assemble. No options for things like open canopies or retracted landing gear, which is a bit of a shame, and there's also no pilot figure, but that's not super uncommon, unfortunately. So a pretty decent kit for a beginner or someone on a budget, and I suppose in theory you could also use extra money that you've saved on buying these kits, especially if you've got one second-hand, getting aftermarket parts. And in fact, my plan for this one is to definitely 3D print a few little upgrades, especially for the cockpit, and probably get a vacuum canopy for it as well. And I'm looking forward to making this one, probably as Saburo Sakai's aircraft from the Tinian Kokutai, and using it, of course, in my Battle of Milne Bay stop motion. Thank you very much for watching this inbox review. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any future inbox reviews, build videos, or stop motions. A massive thank you to my wonderful patrons for helping me to fund not only buying these kits, but also the products I use to make them, and a special thank you to Archie Palmer for donating this Zero. If you want to see how this kit compares to an example of the Airfix and Tamiya Zero kits, then I've also made videos on those, links to which I'll leave in the description. I'll also be taking a look at some other variants of the Zero from Hasegawa, as well as some vintage versions of this kit, so be sure to keep an eye out for those when they eventually come out. That's it for now, but until the next one, as always, take care and model on.